Well, first, I'm rather hoping you'll agree it might be helpful if we just try and take stock of what's been going on in this past week as we move into week two. The first bombs to hit Tehran landed literally minutes before we started my show exactly this time last week, and an awful lot has happened since then. I couldn't begin to cover it all in the hour I have at hand, so I thought I might remind you of some of the key events from my perspective at least, but I'd really love to hear what you're making of it all. And I don't think my colleague James O'Brien was wrong yesterday when he asserted how all the usual sort of Brexit-backing, Boris Johnson fawning, climate change-denying hawks are calling for Britain to enter this new conflict when opinion polls suggest most of the public wants nothing to do with it. I guess that's why current affairs programmes, phone-in shows like this on LBC are so important. 0345 6060 973, the number, if you want to get in early. How did the war start? Well, we could go back to the deposition of the Shah in 79, the rise of Ayatollah Khamenei. We could go back further still and point to the coup of 1953, which is when the Shah was installed. And I'll quote Wikipedia at you directly. Known as Operation Ajax, it was orchestrated by the United States CIA and the United Kingdom MI6. The joint operation was designed to overthrow the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammed Mossadegh to protect British oil interests. That's what it says on Wikipedia, and I note the price of oil has risen a staggering 25% since this time last weekend. What an extraordinary coincidence. How did the war start? Well, if we were to keep it really simple, I'll only go back to the week before when negotiators were still trying to broker peace. On February the 25th, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that an historic agreement with the United States to avert military conflict was within reach. This was ahead of talks in Geneva. Diplomacy must be prioritised to avoid a further escalation, he said, but the US military build-up in the region continued even as he was speaking. Trump describing his naval homage as beautiful on social media. Araghchi reiterated that Iran holds a crystal clear position against developing nuclear weapons while defending its right to develop peaceful nuclear technology. I personally didn't think we had to worry about Iran building a bomb because US forces, according to Donald Trump, quotes, completely and totally obliterated, close quotes, Iran's nuclear capabilities in bombing raids last year. And anyone who says otherwise, according to the White House website, is guilty of spreading fake news. Iran has also, from what I've been reading, used this time to prepare, accelerating the loading of tankers with 20 million oil barrels in just 6 days for export, while the Iranian Security Commission threatened to drag all the countries in the region, in the Gulf region, into war if any attack was launched. Friday last week saw a number of embassies evacuated from Iran, and then on Saturday, of course, it all happened. Not long after the first missiles landed came news of Iran striking back. Israel was attacked. Also Gulf states such as Bahrain that host US military bases. And by the time I came off air on Saturday, I think it was 6 or 7 countries have been hit. Today, it's 13 or 14, I believe. So you've got Israel, you've got Saudi Arabia, Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Lebanon, where 500,000 people have been told to leave their homes by Israel. Cyprus, our airbase, getting hit with a drone. There have also been attacks in Iraq, Syria and Jordan in the region. Turkey had to shoot down an Iranian missile, which I think was fired across their territory by mistake, while the US sank an Iranian frigate thousands of miles from the Gulf off the coast of Sri Lanka, which I suppose you could argue drags them into the mix as well. Reaction towards the US-Israeli war internationally has been mixed. The grounds for it, I think, have been broadly condemned by much of the southern hemisphere. Reaction in Europe is very different, though, completely divided. I mean, you've got Spain has now evicted US military aircraft from its bases. Trump now threatening to cut off all trade with Madrid. And then in Germany, you've got them welcoming the attacks. Starmer, and we're going to talk about him a little later in the programme. Starmer clearly, I think, doubts the legitimacy of the US-Israeli attacks. And Britain, as you know, allows American planes to use our base on Cyprus, but purely for defensive purposes, a position that aligns, according to polls, with what most of you feel. Not our right-wing newspapers, though. 0345 6060 973, the number for your thoughts on how things have developed over the past 7 days. Shock and awe, or has something different taken place? That's what I'd love to know. 0345 6060 973, the number. I suppose we should also consider how long this is going to go on for. Now, Donald Trump, as you know, on the campaign trail, talked a lot about ending forever wars. We've got word from the Americans that we're looking at between 4 and 5 weeks is the time frame that we're being given at the moment. And I wondered whether many of you listening today buy into that. Is it going to be 4 or 5 weeks, or is it going to be a forever war? I was listening to Mark Leahy yesterday talking to Sheila Fogarty, of course, who's been very involved in dealing with the US military and reacting to problems posed by states in the Middle East. And it was very interesting to hear him say yesterday that, as far as he understood it, Iran's nuclear capability, in terms of weapons, had been destroyed. It just wasn't there. But far more concerning, and I know that the main drone factory, I think Shahid Drones, has been struck, but he was arguing that, you can have tens of thousands of drones concealed in buildings all over the area. And these drones, as we now know, are capable of hitting targets pretty much all over the world. And so you have to ask yourself, is the Iranian regime going to offer total surrender, as Donald Trump demanded last night? I have a hideous sense that that's possibly the thing that's very furthest from their mind, that this will be, as far as the clerics are concerned and the revolutionary core, this will be a fight to the death. And a fight to the death is not going to be over in 4 to 5 weeks, in this reporter's opinion. I want to dig a little deeper into this statement from President Masoud Pezeshkian, interim president of Iran, who has essentially apologised to neighbouring countries for the Iranian strikes there, and has said there won't be any more from Iran as long as those countries don't strike Iran. Well, I'm joined by Dr. Ahmed Al-Khuzai, who I spoke to, I think it was pretty much exactly this time last week, a Bahraini political analyst and commentator specialising in Middle Eastern and Arab affairs. And as I remember, Ahmed, when we were talking last week, good morning, by the way, we were dealing with strikes on the naval base, I think in Bahrain, and then subsequently after our conversation, I think a number of hotels housing US military personnel from the Fifth Fleet and CIA and Mossad agents were struck as well.
Yes, Matthew. We've been talking about that a lot lately.
We have.
Let's put it that way. The president, or the interim president of Iran at the moment, talks a lot. I mean, most of what he says is somehow apologetic, which tells us he is not in power, unfortunately. Because if we look at it this way, ever since the demise of the late Ayatollah, Iran is somehow without a leader. And or let's say, based on my calculations and the way I look at things, is that the RGC took over. And each side, or each official in Iran, is issuing statements that are contradicting with one another. One is being apologetic, as we see. This statement came out more than an hour ago, right? While half an hour ago, we heard sirens and we heard bombs in Bahrain.
Because it's a catch-22, isn't it? I mean, we won't attack you if you don't attack us, but the bases are there and the US is using them. So, how do you resolve that, Ahmed? How do you resolve that?
Let me explain. The American bases are in the Gulf, yes. Nobody's denying that. But at least about 10 days prior to last Saturday, prior to Ground Zero, they have somehow, up to a certain level, emptied them. And they started, for example, the vessels, they are in the sea. They're not within our borders in the Gulf. The personnel are deployed. So Iran was not attacked from the Gulf.
You've painted that picture crystal clear, and that's why we need your expert counsel, Dr. Ahmed Al-Khuzai, until, I presume, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, but I'm sure we'll be speaking again. I'm joined by John Rees, a national officer at Stop the War Coalition, organiser of today's march in London. Good morning to you, John.
Good morning.
It's I don't make it too personal about Keir Starmer, but he's had a pretty poor run as Prime Minister. And here we are with the newspaper saying the overwhelming number of Brits support his stance on not joining the US and Israel in attacking Iran.
Yes, I'm not surprised by the opinion polls. I think many people in this country feel exactly as you've described it, that they've seen enough of illegal wars. They've seen enough of wars where there's absolutely no planning afterwards, which leave the country heaps of rubble across the Middle East. I think the theory that this can be done in this way has been tested to destruction, and to the destruction of the society it's been tested on. So I'm not surprised by the poll. I think you won't have to wait too long before Keir Starmer does another of those famous U-turns.
Oh, I was going to ask you just this. Go on.
Well, I can see it coming. I mean, the only novelty will be that he's U-turning away from a policy which is popular, whereas previously he U-turned away from a policy that was unpopular. But there seems to be no limit to the ability to U-turn. If you see, for instance, the front page of the Daily Mail, ready for the big one. B-1 bombers landing in Britain, ready for even larger airstrikes on Iran. I think by this time next week, the government will, if not actually be joining in on the airstrikes themselves, they will look fully complicit with the American and Israeli bombing. So, yeah.
I haven't got much to counter it. David Lammy's comments that, in his opinion, you could make an argument that striking Iran could be legal.
But did you hear what the reason that he gave?
Yes.
The reason he gave was that Cyprus is part of NATO, whereas it's actually not part of NATO. Now, there's a lot of competition for this, but David Lammy may actually be the most stupid person ever to hold ministerial office, because you cannot have his position in government and not know the countries that are or are not part of NATO.
Can I just push you a little bit more on Keir Starmer and the U-turn idea? Because I'm reading the same reports as you. I had an uncomfortable sense that what you have just predicted may come to pass in the next week or two. And then the thing that keeps interrupting that thought is, if I'm Keir Starmer, bruised from the Gorton and Denton with terrible approval ratings, would I be prepared, knowing that he fought so desperately to stop Andy Burnham ultimately challenging him for Prime Minister, would Keir Starmer really be prepared to U-turn against what most people approve of?
Well, I agree. It's you think that he was in a deep enough hole to be able to grasp at any rope thrown down to him, but I'm not absolutely sure that that's the case, and it's usually spectacularly not the case when it comes to Anglo-American relations. I mean, Tony Blair, who up to the point of Iraq actually had a very good standing with the public, had a government that was actually delivering in lots of ways, and certainly by comparison with the ones that came after it. But he threw that all away in an adventure which even the Americans at that point had told him he didn't have to be part of because of the level of opposition to it in this country. So the depths to which even Labour prime ministers will go in pursuit of that alliance it passes the point where it encompasses their own destruction.
I just wonder, with Greenland and the difficulties that Starmer's had, the insults that come from Trump, I wonder about that. May I move forward a little? So you're the Stop the War Coalition. I like international treaties and international organisations, despite the fact that they appear emasculated at the moment. And I would feel much more comfortable if there was international agreement about what Israel and the US was doing. If there was international agreement, would you have a problem with the UK joining the strikes then?
Well, I mean, it would certainly mean that there was some authority for it. and I appreciate your concern about the so-called rules-based international order being ripped up on a daily basis in front of our eyes. I don't think that can conceivably be a good development. But it is worth saying that the rules-based international order was often not observed as fully as the advertised products. Let's put it that way. And the trouble is, the way the UN works is this: that in the Security Council, where the great powers agree, the UN acts. Where the great powers don't agree, it's often paralysed. And I can't see any conceivable circumstance under which that would happen. Now, that doesn't mean to say there couldn't be a negotiated solution here. There was one taking place at the very point where the attack took place. We have now many people, officials in the region, in Omani officials in the region, saying that this deal was progressing, that those negotiations were progressing. So we could, for instance, return to that kind of bilateral discussion or multilateral discussion straight away if the Americans ceased what they're doing and the Americans and the Israelis ceased what they're doing.
Just a final question, more theoretical. Is there, as a National Office of Stop the War Coalition, are there any circumstances in which you would approve war?
Well, if a nation is attacked and has to defend itself, I can't see that I would have been neutral in the Spanish Civil War. For instance, I'm not a pacifist, and I don't think that many people, there are pacifists in the Stop the War Coalition, but I don't think that they're the majority voice in the Stop the War Coalition. So I don't think it's a kind of, apart from, as I say, a small minority, I don't think it's that motivates people. I think that they think these wars are wrong. I think they think that they're colonial enterprises in a century when the colonial mindset, which is that just because we're rich and just because we're well armed, we ought to be able to tell other countries how to run their society. I think they think that should have been consigned to the past if it should ever have had life in the first place. So I think what people are reacting to is sort of grotesque big power politics, really.
John Rees, pleasure talking to you. John, they're National Officer at Stop the War Coalition, who are organising today's Stop the War March. Fascinating range of points there.
A very good morning, and thank you for having me back on.
How things have progressed in 1 week.
Oh, my goodness me. And you're saying progressed and regressed, admittedly.
Point taken.
Because ultimately this is an active war situation, and at the heart of combat is the element of surprise. And so as much as can be planned, especially when it comes to the collateral damage of people and cargo around the world that is basically suspended because of what's happening, that needs to be managed very carefully, because as we've just heard, there was an incident at Dubai Airport again this morning, and they had to shut down operations for half an hour. They're now continuing. And I think what's really important, Matthew, is that this is a part of the world that has some of the finest leadership you will ever find. The CEO of Dubai Airports, who's actually a Brit himself, spectacular man. We have Sir Tim, that's being Paul Griffiths, Sir Tim Clark, who's the head of Emirates. All of these people, along with the UAE leadership, they went through best case scenarios in terms of crisis response during COVID. So there's a proactive way of managing these things, hence Dubai Airport being able to open up in half an hour. But still, it's very volatile, because exactly as you said, those air routes, those corridors are simply dangerous to travel through. So you have to travel around with great care, hence government, military and aviation regulators needing to watch this carefully.
I was commenting earlier that the head of energy in Qatar said that having stopped oil production because they can't ship it through Hormuz, he said that even if the war was to end today, it would take months for Qatar to step up and get back to where they were a week ago. How quickly because obviously I can't ask you how long is this going to go on for, because no one knows how long it's going to go on for, maybe 4 weeks, 5 weeks, maybe much longer. But how quickly can things return to normal if and when we get to a situation where it is safe to travel through these airspaces?
Indeed. I think and this is where I like dividing it into two parts. There's the when will it be over from a military action perspective, and then when will it be over from a recovery perspective? Because that's not only operational recovery, which will slowly come back on again once we know that, again, those air corridors are safe, but there's the psychological recovery. Because if you look at it, for instance, you spoke about Qatar, 75% of the people who travel through Qatar are in transit, 50% for Dubai, for instance. Incredible airlines, incredible leadership, incredible destinations, and all of that has been bruised in terms of people's confidence in simply going to the area. That will take the most time.
Point taken. Do you have any comment on the story in the Financial Times that suggested very wealthy people who found themselves outside of UAE, where they're based for tax purposes, have been renting private jets to fly into Dubai so that they can avoid paying any tax outside?
I think that is opportunistic rumor, and I prefer to work on fact.
Because we're also seeing reports today of people renting private jets to get out of Emirates, and I'm assuming that a private jet is still going to be subject to the same restrictions on airspace, are they not, as commercial flights?
Oh, 100% correct. And that's where what's really important is that with all those air corridors being locked off, if you want to go northwest, which is where the majority of the repatriation flights are going, you have to go over into Saudi, Red Sea, Egypt to come across. That's a lot more time and fuel. And so people will do what they have to stay safe. And if that means flying private, great.
We've got disputed figures, but at least 150,000 Brits that have registered with the Foreign Office to say they want assistance getting back. And as you said, these are incredibly busy international hubs. I mean, how do we get all these people back here if this is where they want to come? How do we do it if we can't fly in?
Extremely carefully and very selectively. So as we say, this weekend we have, for instance, one more charter flight and 5 to 7 commercial, whether it's Emirates, BA, Virgin. And the prioritization takes place on the elderly, families with small children, people who are pregnant, vulnerable individuals, and also vulnerable cargo, importantly. So pharmaceuticals, electronics, perishables. So it really is a prioritization. And if people are safe and secure on the ground, stay there, because you don't want to be exposing yourself to a more dangerous situation. So people will start moving again. It's just really hard because nothing hits the nervous system of a human being like a crisis.
It's not the first time I've told you this. You're absolutely brilliant. Anita Mendiratta, pleasure talking to you again. A fantastic detail there on the travel situation in the Middle East. Sara is on the line in Greenwich. Good morning to you.
Hi, good morning. You mentioned earlier about the fact that if the UK government should be concerned about the 4 guy related to IRGC in the London. And I would say definitely, as an Iranian, I'm telling you, you should be concerned. And if you don't want to be involved in the war, that's absolutely fine. But you have to be concerned about the security and safety of British citizens inside the UK. Sure. And what I'm telling you is based on a proof. So as an Iranian, sometimes I watch the Iranian TV, the national TV. And I'm giving you the reference based on the recent talk of a guy called Rees. So he recently had a talk on the national TV, and I'm just telling you one by one the word that he said. So he said, we are very angry about the death of the Supreme Leader. So we invite everyone, everywhere, in any way possible, must act in any way possible to harm the imperialist system. The capital, talents, and assets of this imperialist system, means the West, for all, are our targets. And we invite anyone, if someone is a software developer, they know what to do. Someone else can kill any Zionist person. The global axis of resistance must be driven by the masses. People themselves are creative. They know what to do. So we invite them, even if they're not Muslim, but if they are against the believers in the Western country, go for it. Go and do whatever you want to do against anyone who are fighting with Iranian regime.
Okay, sorry, forgive me for interrupting, but Aaron, my producer, just passed on some breaking news, which I find intriguing. And as an Iranian person, I'll be interested in just a very quick response to it. So Masoud Pezeshkian, the interim president in Iran, has just apologised to neighbouring countries, so the Gulf states, saying that Iran will not attack them again unless attacks originate from those countries. What's your reaction to that, Sara?
That's so funny. Honestly, like, if you are attacking other countries, and they didn't just attack army-related places. They attack hotels. They attack airports. So they can't justify this. Okay? And they are using these attacks as something to protect them. And they want to say these words, so the Arab countries saying, like, okay, America, don't use our land.
I think Sara, sorry to interrupt, I think that's exactly the subtext of that message. A pleasure talking to you. So that's Iran's interim president apologising to neighbouring countries in the region and saying that Iran will not attack them again unless attacks originate from those countries. I am not a military strategist, but there has got to be something to discuss within that.